Support provided by Walters, Papillon, Thomas Cullins, LLC, specializing in business litigation and personal injury cases for over 40 years.
I think both of these candidates have stories to tell. We heard a lot about John Bell Edwards and his backstory in 2015, graduate of West Point, star quarterback at a meet. He and his wife had a troubled pregnancy, and they decided to go through, and she had a beautiful child, and that made him pro-life on the choice issue. And it was told effectively. And Eddie Risponi has a story to tell as well that largely has not been told. I don't think having a Trump bumper sticker on your truck is necessarily something that reveals a whole lot about a person other than he likes Donald Trump a lot. But Eddie Risponi, he lost his wife to cancer. They were married 35 year. He's remarried. I didn't hear anything about that in the primary. That would be an interesting story to find out more about him. And of course, he's from North Baton Rouge. He's the city slicker in the race, and in this particular primary, he got in the runoff by getting huge support in rural areas. He got a majority in one parish, Livingston Parish, but he did very well in a lot of parishes where he's probably never traveled. And that's another thing that's different than other campaigns, is that the retail politics has pretty much gone out the window. Candidates are no longer going door to door. They're no longer showing up at Rotary clubs. They basically now do their campaigning on television, radio, and on the internet, and that's where the action is. And if Eddie Risponi wins, you can bet that this will be replicated. He hasn't been done very many interviews. We tried to interview him on the show I host, and we've not had success, but we'd love to talk with him. But his name is Risponi. There was a time not so long ago when a man of his ethnicity would not have been welcomed into social clubs in this community. I'd like to hear more about that. He grew up here. He was born in 1949. He's lived a lot of years, has a lot of wisdom, and what I hear is a rags to riches story. So maybe that story will be told, but we need to know more about our candidates, not only on what they stand for, and sometimes we don't even get that, but more about them. And quite often it's those moments of humanity and humility that determine whether we vote for or against a candidate. I can recall Kathleen Blanco was the underdog against Bobby Jindal in 2003 when they were in a runoff for governor. And she turned that inertia around by, in a debate, showing some humanity by answering a question about their biggest challenge in life and how she had lost a son in an industrial accident and how she and her family came back from that. And it was one of those unscripted moments that defined her and enabled her, I think, to beat Bobby Jindal in a race that was relatively close and one that he was favored to win. So something like that could happen in the next 4 weeks. In 2015, David Vitter was the solid choice. Many people thought he was on his way to being governor. He had never lost an election. He had a lot of money. He had the institutional support in the Republican Party, and a lot of people were just flat scared of the guy because he, as we know, is a tough politician and keeps score when people do things he doesn't like. And he had two Republicans running in the same race, and Jay Darden and Scott Angel and John Bell Edwards. And one of those defining moments in the campaign, and I had a peripheral role, but it really wasn't me. I was the moderator at one of the early debates, June 26, 2015, Marriott Hotel, New Orleans, and the four major candidates are there. And the question that someone from the audience had presented that was on an index card was, what's been your biggest challenge in life and how did you address it? And Vitter was first. And he probably would have answered it differently if he'd been second or third or fourth, but he didn't have time to think about his answer, and he went there. He said it was the pain I caused in my marriage. And I thought he handled it eloquently, and I thought, you know, he may have gotten this out of the way. This may not be addressed the rest of the campaign because he handled it so well. And I actually liked him by the way he answered that question. Well, Jay Darden goes second, and he talks about conquering cancer and surviving a near-fatal car accident. John Bell Edwards goes third, and he talks about surviving the rigors of Army Ranger training and jumping out of a plane and being near starvation and deprived of water. And then Scott Angel says that he was in a car behind his little sister who was driving, and she had an accident and got killed right in front of him. And he had to call his mother and tell her what had happened, and you could hear a pin drop in the room. And then I'm thinking, well, Vitter may not be so happy because all of the other candidates were talking about something that they responded to in their lives, where Vitter was talking about the biggest challenge he'd had in the 54 years of his life was consorting with prostitutes and having to make up with his wife. And Vitter, being no fool, after the debate, he goes backstage. He's first, and I'm about a minute behind because of the way the podium was configured. And so I see him chewing out Ronnie Anderson, the head of the Farm Bureau, about that Engster ambushing me. and Ronnie Anderson's not a guy to mess with. And I went up to him. Ronnie didn't need me to defend him, but I wanted to interact with the senator, and he just ran away. He actually got on a freight elevator and it didn't go anywhere, and then he banged, "Let me out of here, let me." and then he comes off the freight elevator, and this nice lady says, "Would you like to have your photo taken with the other candidates and with Jim?" And he goes, "Hell no." And he's off to the races. And then about 15 minutes later, he sends a message on his phone to Ronnie Anderson complaining about the way he was treated. And Ronnie said, a tough guy. So Ronnie goes before the Farm Bureau convention and reads the message he got from Senator Vitter. You know, that was just one of those things that turned an election. And why do I think it turned the election? Because it told the other candidates, this is this guy's Achilles heel. And if you remember, they just kept going there and going there and going there. And I was watching a football game at 6 o'clock on election night in 2015. John Bell Edwards, of course, in a runoff now with David Vitter. And they're running that prostitutes or patriots spot at 6 o'clock on election night. Just one more time to slam it in that our guy went to West Point and their guy was consorting with prostitutes. And it worked. This is a red state. John Bell Edwards is the only Democrat standing, and he got 56% of the votes. 56% of the votes against David Vitter, who had never lost an election. And it shows how things can happen in a blink, because John Bell Edwards in August of that year had been encouraged to get out of the race by the Democratic Party. They wanted him to get out and Mitch Landrieu to get in, thinking that Landrieu had a better shot. They wanted Edwards to run for Attorney General, and he said, "No, I've been running for 2 years. I'm not getting out. You can bring Landrieu in, but I'm not getting out." And of course, they had 2 Democrats in the race. We would have ended up having 2 Republicans in a runoff. So it didn't happen. He ends up getting in a runoff with Vitter, and he ends up winning. And one of the other reasons he won, of course, was that Jay Darden, who finished 4th, endorsed him. And Scott Angel stayed out of the race. He didn't endorse anybody. But in that race, in the primary, Edwards got 40% of the votes. Second place was Vitter with 23. Scott Angel charging. If he'd had another week, he might have caught Vitter. He's at 20, and Jay Darden's at 15. So collectively, the 3 main Republicans got 58%, and John Bell Edwards got 40%. But he ended up getting 56%. So it's easy to see that he got 16 of the remaining 58% or so. So he got enough of the vote that he won in the landslide. This time, on a numerical basis, the hurdle isn't as extreme. He's at 47, his opponent's at 27. So if things were to stay the same, you would think that John Bell Edwards could get 12% of Ralph Abraham's votes and win. But things are not the same, and he is an incumbent. And we tend to, in life and in politics and in Louisiana, we like shiny new objects. And John Bell Edwards is no longer the shiny new object Eddie Risponi is. And he'll have Donald Trump here campaigning for him. And the president has his problems nationally, but Louisiana is not one of the places where he is unpopular. For on the whole, he is a popular president in Louisiana. And to show how that popularity in his case is translated into votes, in Louisiana, 2004, 2008, 2012, those three presidential elections, collectively in those 3 years, we voted as a state, 58% of the electorate voted in those presidential elections. Now, only 44% of the electorate voted in the governor's election, but 58% of us collectively in 4, 8, and 12 voted in the presidential election, and that mirrored the national trend. The national numbers were 57%. Last time, in 2016, the national numbers actually dipped down to 56%, but in Louisiana, we went up 10 points, 68%. So that means a lot of people are going out to vote because of the president. Now, some of them, of course, are going out because they don't like him, and that may be energizing another segment of the electorate, but for the most part, I think it's people who liked him. And on Election Day last Saturday, the electorate was made up of 42% of Republicans, and as a voting bloc, the Republican Party, people who are affiliated with it, are only 30% of the total electorate. So it was an unusually large Republican turnout, and that's why John Bel Edwards missed perhaps making it without a runoff. It would have been close if it would have been a different turnout, but he was not close. He was 3.4% away from winning in the primary. And no Louisiana governor since 1975, when we went to the open primary, has ever been forced to a runoff and won. But it's only happened really one time, an incumbent governor, and that was Edwin Edwards in the year of 1987, and he didn't even go to the post in the election. Bob Levy remembers that. Robert, you know, Buddy Roemer won on the primary night because Edwin Edwards said no mas. He only got 28% of the votes. He knew he was headed to certain defeat, so he didn't go to the post, and it was a stroke of brilliance because it deprived Roemer of a mandate, and then 4 years later, Edwin Edwards gets in. He has the luck also of David Duke being in that race, and as a result, he ends up unseating Buddy Roemer. So John Bel Edwards is trying to do something no incumbent governor has done, and that's win a runoff since we went to the open primary in 1975. But there have been other elections similar to this one not involving a governor, and the one that resembles it most closely is the year of 2002 when Mary Landrieu was running for re-election. She had defeated Woody Jenkins 6 years earlier, but she was running and she got 46%. Second place was Susie Terrell at 27%. And then John Cooksey and Tony Perkins collectively got 24. It's almost an identical race to this one, Cooksey and Perkins being Republicans. Now we have Edwards at 47, not 46. We have Risponi at 27, same as Terrell, and we have 24 that Abraham received, same as Cooksey and Perkins. And Landrieu ended up winning that runoff 52 to 48%. But things were different then. At that time, Louisiana was still largely a blue state, Democratic. The only statewide elected official who was a Republican just 17 years ago was Fox McKitha. So that has changed. John Breaux, who was the other senator, campaigned heavily for Landrieu. Now, Susie Terrell did have George Bush, who campaigned for her, who was a popular president in Louisiana. This is right after 9/11, but she ended up winning a race that many thought she would lose because collectively on primary night, the Republicans got more votes than she did. But John Bel Edwards also has another problem as we look ahead to November 16th, in that he has literally no surrogates. There are no prominent Democrats left who can tell his story for him. Think about it. Other than Cedric Richmond, who's a congressman, we have no statewide elected Democrats. And the story is just not there for somebody like Joe Biden to come in, or Hillary Clinton. Maybe Bill Clinton, but I doubt that we'll see him either. So John Bel Edwards is kind of like Frank Sinatra in 1969, Paul Arrigo, in his album, A Man Alone. He is out there all by himself, and he will have to tell the story on his own. And if I were in his shoes, and I'll be doing a radio show with him in just over an hour, but I would tell him that he needs to go after the president, because The people who are with Donald Trump are not going to vote for him, and there's a lot to attack, and this race has become largely a national race. Eddie Risponi has attached himself to the president. That's his message, that I am basically part of the club, that I am with the president, and this other guy is with the squad and with Nancy Pelosi and every leftist Democrat you ever heard, and we don't want any people, we don't want his kind running the state. That's basically the message. It's very simple, and it may work. A few weeks ago, Mark McKinnon was here, who ran Buddy Roemer's campaign in '87, helped run it with Raymond Strother. And he was commenting on how Bill Clinton, when he ran for president in 92, he announced in October of '91, just 3 months before the Iowa caucuses, showing you how things have changed. And Paul Begala and James Carville are working with him, and they ask him a question. This is just a rehearsal, and they said, you know, what about the economy? And Clinton talks for 25 minutes about the economy. And Begala says, Governor, that's not going to cut it. He says, people aren't going to hear this. He goes, but Paul, this is very complex. You just can't tell a story this complex in a few seconds. And so Begala pulls out a copy of the New Testament and says, what do you think of this, Governor? Well, that's very complex too, Paul. I've read it 80 times and I still don't understand it. But and Begala says, John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever have faith in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. He says, that sums it up, doesn't it? You got a point, Paul. You got a point. So his mantra became the economy stupid, and that basically got him elected president. 3 words, the economy stupid. But Begala said that he added up the words, and that John 16 has exactly 140 characters, which is the limit for Twitter. And now we are in the Twitter age, and our president uses Twitter amazingly. And next year he's running for re-election. No question he'll carry Louisiana. Even if he's impeached, he's going to carry Louisiana. But nationally, the Democrats have to find a candidate who can beat him. And I thought Begala made a good point. He said that Elizabeth Warren's the favorite, and I think she is now. She's moved ahead of Biden into the favorites role. And she does have a message. And most of the Democrats, did Hillary have a message in 2016? Really, she didn't. But Elizabeth Warren's message is essentially the same message as Donald Trump. The system is rigged and you are being screwed. Now, the way she interprets it is much different than the president, but at least she has a message, so it should be an interesting showdown in the year of 2020, and we're not that far away from 2020. We in our community here, we passed St. George. I remember the late John Friganese from this podium saying, don't do it, don't do it. Well, we did it. And we'll see what happens. And I think it's too early to determine if the world's going to cave in, but I do know that, you know, I'm a numbers guy, and Baton Rouge is no longer the second largest city in the state of Louisiana. It won't be when St. George becomes a reality, because New Orleans was number 1, Baton Rouge was 2, now Shreveport is 2, and Baton Rouge and Lafayette are basically in a tie for 3, and St. George is 5 with 86,000 people. And based on the FBI crime statistics, Baton Rouge, in its old configuration with 225,000 people, was ranked 3rd in America in its murder rate. Now, what happens when you take 86,000 people out and they're in areas largely that don't have the crime that the area that remains Baton Rouge does? Suddenly we become the most murderous city in America, which will be great for a guy like Paul Arrigo, whose job is to get people to visit Baton Rouge. So nothing has really changed, but the perception is quite often enough that it becomes a very difficult reality to deal with. So let's see what's going on there. I see Beverly Brooks Thompson. Congratulations to you for running first in District 16. Tomorrow there will be a recount of the absentee ballots. And if things stay as they are, then we're going to have Beverly Brooks Thompson, Steve Carter, and Franklin Foyle. Franklin's a member. Is he here today, Franklin? I guess Franklin's out counting votes, but but can you imagine the odds of this happening? As Dan Clater said the other day, are about the same odds of being hit by an asteroid. But there were 40,000 votes cast in that race, and we've got a tie for second place, which, of course, we all know now that every vote really does count if we didn't know before. But if things don't change, it'll be a three-way race unless one of the candidates blinks, and we've got some maneuvering behind the scenes. It was a big night for Lane Grigsby. He was all over the map. He got Bessie candidates elected. He got Cleo Fields elected. And he got Eddie Rispone into a runoff, and he's backing Steve Carter and trying to get Franklin Foyle out of the race. So some people are calling him a shadow governor. If he has Eddie Rispone in the governor's office, I think Eddie is a guy who's a businessman. He's got a learning curve. No doubt that Lane Grigsby will be a person who will be a big player in state politics, bigger than he already is, and he's pretty darn big. So we'll see what happens in the next 4 weeks, but it's going to be fun to follow, and I hope everybody will vote. And it is kind of tragic that only 44% of the people in the state voted in the primary. Last time when Edwards and Bitter were in the runoff, the turnout went from 38 to 40, which was low, but it did go up. And the old theory was that when you have a runoff with fewer races, you have fewer voters. But I hope people are energized enough that they will vote, and that is a big part of being a citizen. And for whatever reason in Louisiana, as I mentioned, we voted 68% in the presidential election. And maybe we need to go to Tuesday elections. I don't know, but it's just not very good when less than half of our registered voters actually show up. So let's hope we can do better there. And I look forward to following it with you. And if there are any questions in our remaining time, I'm at your service. Yes?
So what's your take on Bernie Sanders and his outcome in the presidential race?
Well, I thought you talk about an act of humility and humanity. I thought last night when he thanked his fellow candidates for praying for him, and it was sincere. You could tell it was sincere. He showed some humanity, but the man is pushing 80 years old, and he's now got a heart condition, and that's not a low-pressure job. And I'll say this for Donald Trump. He's 73 years old. He's not that much younger than Sanders, but most people don't talk about his age. The man's got an abundance of energy, and he will, if he's reelected, be the oldest president ever. And as we know, he doesn't live a very healthy lifestyle either. The man he's huge. He's a big guy, and golf just doesn't cut it. Bernie Sanders was trying to tell me that golf was a tough guy sport. Well, no. Stephen Himesfield, who used to head the Pennington Center, who still teaches there, he grew up down the street in Queens from Donald Trump. And he said Donald Trump had a paper route when they were kids. And I said, that's great. I said, who would have thought, because his dad was rich, Donald Trump actually had a paper route. He says, yeah, Jim, but he threw it from the back of a limo.
Of the Democratic, you might not want to answer this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Of the Democratic candidates, which do you think would have the best chance against Donald Trump?
Well, I think Biden is the guy who has the best chance, even with all his flaws, and he's older than Trump, but he is popular in Pennsylvania, his neighboring state from Delaware, and when you look at that map, very few states are probably going to flip, and the three states the Democrats are looking at they have to flip all three, by the way. They can't flip 2 or 3 if everything stays the same. They've got to get Wisconsin, where they're holding their convention in Milwaukee. They got to get Michigan, and they got to get Pennsylvania, and I think Biden has the best shot of getting those states back into the Democratic column. It is remarkable when you look at the 2012 presidential race and the 2016 race. It would seem that the races would be wildly different, but they really weren't. Both Obama and Hillary got 66 million votes. Mitt Romney got 61 million, and Donald Trump got 63 million. He was still almost 3 million votes behind Hillary Clinton, but he got 304 votes in the Electoral College, And on the other hand, President Obama got 326 votes in his reelection quest because of the configuration of states. And Trump's base, his base, and that's why we're going to see him 3 times in Louisiana probably in the next 4 weeks, his base is the Southeastern Conference. The 11 states of the SEC all voted for Donald Trump. 150 electoral votes, which means he only needs 120 of the remaining 338 to win the election. The Southeastern Conference is his base, and I don't know if any of those 11 states will go against him. Florida is the wild card. But in every one of those states, I was looking at this last night, every one of those states in 2016 voted higher as far as a percentage of the electorate on election day participation than the nation. So he energized votes in the South. And this guy, he's not one of us. He's certainly no Bubba. He talked about John Bel Edwards taking away Second Amendment rights. Well, Edwards, of course, he's right there with Trump on guns, and he actually goes hunting. But the mantra will be that if you elect him, he's part of that crowd, and that crowd wants to take your guns, they want to kill babies, and they're really bad people. But it works in the South, and Donald Trump, when you get 150 electoral votes just right off the top, it makes it certainly a difficult chore for anybody else to beat him on the other side.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Support provided by Walters, Papillon, Thomas Collins, LLC, specializing in business litigation and personal injury cases for over 40 years.